Inside a shipping container-sized box parked next to a solar farm in China, a battery pack is quietly storing enough electricity to power a small town through the night. And it isn't built from lithium at all. It's built from the same element sitting inside a bag of ordinary table salt. That is real. It exists, it's already been deployed in pilot projects, and the company behind it has stated a manufacturing cost target that could genuinely upend the oldest argument against renewable energy. Every figure in this video comes from verified corporate disclosures, industry cost analysis, and specialist energy reporting, because a claim this consequential deserves real scrutiny rather than just a shocking headline. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what BYD actually built, what its real cost target is, and where the more dramatic numbers in this story are genuine projections rather than settled facts. Here's the argument this entire story is actually about, because you can't understand why a battery's price tag could matter this much without first understanding the specific criticism it's aimed at. For decades, the single most durable argument against replacing fossil fuels with solar and wind power hasn't been about the panels or the turbines themselves. It's been about what happens when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, a problem the energy industry calls intermittency. Here's why that argument has proven so difficult to counter. Unlike a coal or gas plant, which can burn fuel on demand at any hour, renewable generation depends on cooperating weather, meaning any grid trying to run primarily on solar and wind needs some way to store surplus energy generated during sunny, windy hours and release it later during calm nights. And for years, the batteries capable of doing that at real grid scale have simply cost too much to make the economics work cleanly against fossil fuel backup power. Think about what that cost barrier has actually meant in practice. Every grid operator, every utility planner, and every skeptical politician arguing against an aggressive renewable transition has had a genuinely fair economic point to make. Because storing electricity at scale has, until very recently, remained expensive enough to keep gas peaker plants as the more affordable backup option almost everywhere in the world. Here's where BYD enters this specific story, and here's the backstory behind why the company is approaching this problem so differently from its own closest domestic rival. BYD, already one of the world's largest electric vehicle and battery manufacturers, has been developing a third-generation sodium-ion battery platform built around what's called a polyanion chemistry, specifically a sodium iron phosphate formulation the industry refers to by the shorthand NFPP. Here's the strategic decision that separates BYD's approach from nearly everyone else currently working on sodium-ion technology. Rather than aiming this new battery chemistry at passenger electric vehicles, where energy density, how much power a battery can pack into a given weight, matters enormously, BYD is deliberately targeting stationary grid energy storage instead, a use case where a battery never has to move, meaning weight and density matter dramatically less than raw cost per unit of stored energy. Here's how that strategy is actually playing out across the wider Chinese battery industry right now. In June of 2026, KTL, China's largest battery maker, partnered with automaker Chang'an to launch a mass-produced passenger vehicle powered by a 45 kilowatt-hour sodium-ion battery pack, pursuing sodium chemistry specifically for cars, while BYD, by contrast, has pointed its own sodium-ion investment almost entirely at the electricity grid instead, splitting China's two largest battery companies into two genuinely different bets on where this technology matters most. Here's the actual product BYD has built around this strategy, the MC Cube SIB energy storage system, a shipping container-sized unit BYD describes as the world's first high-performance sodium-ion battery system, specifically engineered for grid-scale energy storage. Built using the same blade battery packing architecture the company already uses across its electric vehicle lineup. Here's the mechanism behind why sodium-ion chemistry is fundamentally cheaper to manufacture than the lithium-ion batteries currently dominating the grid storage market. Sodium is roughly 1,000 times more abundant in the Earth's crust than lithium, and according to industry reporting, sodium as a raw material typically sells for somewhere between 1 and 3% of lithium's price, meaning the core input cost sitting underneath every single cell is dramatically lower before any manufacturing efficiency is even factored in. Here's a second, more technical cost advantage layered on top of that raw material gap. Sodium-ion battery designs can use aluminum current collectors on both the positive and negative electrodes, whereas conventional lithium-ion batteries require more expensive copper on one side, specifically because lithium can react dangerously with aluminum under certain conditions, eliminating an entire category of costly copper hardware from every single cell BYD manufactures. Here's the number that shows this technology has already moved past the pure laboratory stage. BYD's research and development cells have already demonstrated 200 amp hours of capacity, alongside more than 10,000 charge-discharge cycles, and according to corporate filings, megawatt-hour scale versions of this system were already being deployed in real pilot projects during 2025. Meaning this isn't a technology sitting purely on a whiteboard. It's already out in the field being tested at meaningful scale. Here's the number that matters most for understanding this video's title. And here's exactly where the honest, careful distinction has to be made. BYD's third-generation NFPP sodium-ion cells are currently priced, as of 2026, at roughly 0.36 to 0.38 yuan per watt-hour, converting to approximately $50 to $53 per kilowatt-hour, a price point that's already reached rough cost parity with conventional lithium iron phosphate batteries, the current cost leader in grid storage. Here's BYD's own stated target looking forward. The company has publicly stated a goal of driving that manufacturing cost down to 0.3 yuan per watt-hour, or approximately $40 per kilowatt-hour by 2027, a genuinely aggressive target, but one that sits meaningfully above the $20 figure referenced in this video's title. Here's exactly where that $20 number actually comes from, because getting this distinction right matters more than repeating an exciting headline. Energy commentators analyzing this story, rather than BYD itself, have specifically framed $20 per kilowatt-hour as the psychological and economic threshold that would fully dismantle the remaining case against renewable energy reliability. As one widely cited energy analyst put it, every renewables can't run a grid argument ultimately rests on the assumption that storing electricity is expensive, and $20 per kilowatt-hour is specifically the number commentators believe would finally remove that assumption entirely. Read that again. $20 per kilowatt hour isn't a price BYD has actually hit, or even the company's own currently stated 2027 target. It's the number industry analysts have identified as the true tipping point, sitting roughly half of where BYD's own public roadmap is currently aimed. Here's why that distinction doesn't make this story any less significant, though. And here's the trajectory that makes the $20 threshold look genuinely reachable rather than purely aspirational. Sodium-ion battery costs have already fallen below nickel, manganese, cobalt, lithium chemistry pricing in 2026, and industry analysis projects the technology will drop below lithium iron phosphate pricing entirely by 2027, delivering what analysts describe as a structural $15 to $20 per kilowatt-hour cost advantage over the current market leader within roughly a year of that crossover point. Here's the pattern underneath the cost trajectory that matters more than any single year's price target. Battery manufacturing has consistently followed what's called an experience curve, where costs fall by a predictable percentage with every doubling of cumulative global production volume, and the International Renewable Energy Agency has separately projected that sodium-ion cell costs broadly across the industry, not just at BYD specifically, could reach $40 per kilowatt-hour by 2030, as global manufacturing capacity scales from roughly 70 gigawatt-hours of annual production today toward 400 gigawatt-hours. Think about what that scaling trajectory actually implies if it continues past 2030 rather than stopping there. An industry-wide cost curve that's already projected to reach BYD's own individual 2027 target on a broader industry-wide basis by 2030 has genuine momentum to keep falling further in the years immediately after, which is exactly the kind of multi-year extrapolation that gets you from a real near-term $40 target toward a $20 figure within the following several years, placing a year like 2031, referenced in this video's title, inside a plausible extrapolation of where this cost curve is heading, even though it isn't a date BYD itself has publicly committed to. Here's the number that makes this battery genuinely attractive for grid operators beyond just the raw manufacturing cost. BYD's reported target of more than 10,000 charge-discharge cycles translates, under standardized power distribution usage patterns, to an estimated operating lifespan of roughly 33 years for a single installed system. Think about what that lifespan actually changes for a utility's own long-term financial planning. A battery system that can genuinely run for 3 decades doesn't just cost less per kilowatt hour up front. It dramatically reduces how often a utility has to budget for full system replacement, fundamentally changing the total cost of ownership calculation grid planners actually use when comparing storage against building an entirely new gas peaker plant instead. Here's the broader market context that shows this isn't a niche technology bet limited to a single company. The global sodium-ion battery market as a whole is projected to grow from roughly $1.8 billion in 2025 to $12.5 billion by 2035, with the grid storage segment specifically expected to capture close to 48% of that entire market by the end of that period, meaning BYD's specific strategic bet on stationary storage rather than passenger vehicles lines up directly with where independent market analysts already expect this technology's biggest growth to actually happen. Before going any further into what this could eventually mean for the broader energy transition, it's worth pulling back and being honest about exactly what sodium-ion technology can't do, because a fair explanation of this breakthrough has to include its real limitations alongside its real advantages. Here's the trade-off sitting underneath every one of the cost advantages covered so far. Sodium-ion batteries currently deliver meaningfully lower energy density than lithium-ion chemistry, with commercial sodium cells reaching somewhere around 100 to 175 watt-hours per kilogram, compared to roughly 250 to 280 watt-hours per kilogram for the high-performance nickel-based lithium chemistry used in premium electric vehicles. Here's exactly why that density gap matters so much for BYD's specific strategic choice. A lower density battery is a genuine deal-breaker for a passenger vehicle, where every extra kilogram of battery weight directly eats into driving range. But it's a largely irrelevant weakness for a stationary shipping container-sized storage unit sitting permanently next to a solar farm, which never has to move an inch. Precisely why BYD chose grid storage as this specific chemistry's home rather than trying to force it into a category where its core weakness actually matters. Here's the second honest limitation worth including directly. BYD's own currently stated cost target remains $40 per kilowatt hour by 2027, not 20, and that 2027 target itself is still a stated corporate goal rather than an already achieved manufacturing reality, meaning everything discussed in this video about a $20 threshold and any date attached to reaching it sits in the territory of a well-supported industry projection, rather than a confirmed commitment from BYD itself. So here's the full picture, start to finish. The oldest, most durable argument against a full renewable energy transition has always come down to the cost of storing electricity for the hours when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. BYD built its third-generation sodium-ion battery platform centered on a sodium iron phosphate chemistry and packaged inside its MC Cube SIB grid storage system, specifically to attack that cost problem directly, taking advantage of sodium's raw material abundance and cheaper aluminum-only current collectors to already reach rough cost parity with lithium iron phosphate batteries today, with a stated target of roughly $40 per kilowatt hour by 2027. Industry analysts, rather than BYD itself, have identified $20 per kilowatt hour as the true tipping point that would fully dismantle the remaining economic argument against renewables, a target that sits beyond BYD's own current roadmap, but one that falls within a plausible extrapolation of the same cost curve already driving this technology's rapid price declines. What you're actually watching in this story is the same pattern that played out with solar panels themselves a decade earlier, a technology that skeptics insisted would always remain too expensive to matter at real scale, until a sustained manufacturing cost curve quietly proved that assumption wrong, 1 percentage point at a time, until the economics simply stopped supporting the old argument at all. This battery hasn't ended the fossil fuel era yet, but it's the clearest evidence so far that the specific economic argument propping up that era's remaining years is running out of road. If breakdowns like this into the real numbers and the real distinction between what's confirmed and what's projected in China's biggest energy breakthroughs are useful to you, hit like and subscribe, because there's more of this coming, including a closer look at what happens the first time a national grid operator actually builds its backup power strategy entirely around sodium-ion storage instead of gas peaker plants. So here's the honest question for the comments. Does a real $40 target with a plausible path toward $20 change how you think about the renewable energy debate? Or does the gap between BYD's actual roadmap and this video's headline number make you want to see the $20 price confirmed before you believe it changes anything? I read every single one,